Well, hello, guys. This is Katie with Vintage and Vinyl. And tonight I have a special guest for Show and Tell. We have Patrick, the Trusty Huckster Mercantile here, showing his collection of cake toppers. And I'm very excited about this. So, Patrick, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, again, I'm Patrick, a.k.a. Trusty Huckster Mercantile. And I have been a vintage reseller for about a year and a half, but been into vintage and antiques much longer than that. I just started reselling about a year and a half ago. And I have an active channel with live sales and deep dives, of which Katie has participated in multiple deep dives, with another one coming up. No, do you have another one coming up? No, we just did yours, but we'll have another one coming up. She's got many topics to choose from, and live sales on Thursday nights.
Lots of fun. Patrick's channel is great. So I have linked him down below. So if you aren't subscribed, go check out Patrick. And I have to say, Patrick, I'm loving the hat. It's so fun.
My summer straw. Didn't quite find the boater. I actually admittedly stole this from my daughter's bedroom. So I'm not sure what that says about me, that she and I have the same head size, for one. But the other one I had was a little bit bigger. It was black. I'm like, it's a little too dark. I'm like, let's go summer. Let's go to the light one. If I'm going to be on Katie's channel, I need to be as dapper as Katie, and this is as close as it's going to get.
Well, it looks great. And when I was prepping for the show and tell, I was trying to find a brooch that matched you, Patrick, or cake toppers, and I do not have any type of like food brooch. So that I couldn't find. And I thought about wearing a dog for the dachshunds, but I didn't have a little dachshund. So tonight we just went with a simple leaf and olive green hat.
Excellent. Well, I have a feeling you will now be inundated with food-related brooches to make sure, from all of your many friends and fans, to make sure you are never without a food-related brooch again.
Yes. I need a cake brooch.
I need a cake brooch.
And a dachshund brooch. I will get a dachshund brooch so I can be all spiffy. Okay, let's say hello to some folks coming in the chat tonight. Diana, Little Vintage Me is here. I haven't seen you in forever, Diana. Hello. We have Helen Casey joining us. Welcome, Helen. Peterson's always a big supporter of everyone. She's in the chat with her fun emojis. And let's see who else is coming in. Oh, Angela's here from Illinois. Hello, Angela. Welcome. And Proud American, Delbert. I think he's going to keep us laughing through the show. And Sean, Skunky Junk, is joining us. Welcome, Sean. Love your little logo there. And I saw some other people. Peterson saying hi to everyone. Hey, Jamie, Mid-Century Wasted. Welcome. And Sandra Smith is here. And Brian from the Chicagoland area is joining us. Karen Radford's in the chat. Barbie, Punk Funk and Junk. I love your name, Barbie. Emancipation 300 is joining us. Michelle. And so many other folks are in the chat. Oh, Dana's here. Or Dina from Left Lane Finds. Welcome, Dina. Haven't seen you in a while. And we have Christy, Tippy Winks Vintage, is joining in. Hi, Christy. And Xenomorph. Hey, Xeno. Oh, I'm so glad that you got to see the Fatbird Finds video and that you saw the dense nugget. That's wonderful, Zeno. I'm so glad. Maybe we'll have you on Show and Tell sometime showing your vacuum collection, Zeno. That would be really cool. Well, Patrick, let's get started. I'm so excited about seeing these cake toppers because I never thought of these as a collection. So I think this is pretty cool. And I know that these are something that you're going to be adding to your live sale soon. So tell us about that.
Yes. So, full disclosure, unlike many of the show and tells that Katie has had, this is not a collection that I personally have developed over time, or even a collection I have. I will start, though, by saying I did grow up, honestly enough, with a love of cake decorating in the house. I've talked about my mother on shows, usually positively. But the one thing about my mother, she was Fran's Hobby Corner. That was something she was a full-time worker, but then she did these crafts and things in the basement. The biggest thing we did was ceramics. But one of the things she did was cake decorating. And so I grew up learning how to do the really elaborate, so this is in the 70s, the really elaborate cakes. And I actually helped make my brother's wedding cake in 1983.
Wow.
I learned with the little nail how to do rosebuds with the frosting, and I made all the roses for my brother's wedding cake. So that's something I definitely grew up in, but it wasn't, I kind of like what you said, I never really saw it as a collection. You know, I have my collection of tips. I've not decorated a cake in years, but I still have my Wilton, cake set with all the tips in it. And so for people that are into cake decorating, this is the real thing. This is what Wilton did. Wilton's kind of the name that people know. I will say, well, I'll put it this way. Wilton is the name that people know here. It is kind of a global name. Is that kind of the major name that you know, Katie?
Yes, I've always heard of Wilton. In fact, the cake decorating tips that I have, I mean, I have just a few, are Wilton.
Because Wilton is based in Chicago. So sometimes it's a regional thing. So I'm like, I assumed Wilton was definitely worldwide, but so Wilton is definitely a big deal in the Chicago area. And they started their company in 1929 and started in the house in Chicago, kind of built up into a factory in Chicago, then moved into the suburbs around 1980. So, we grew up at a time where they had already introduced it. They were kind of a big player they actually offered the GI Bill. They actually offered cake decorating classes as part of the GI Bill. And wow. Literally hundreds of thousands of men became professional bakers as a result of the GI Bill going through the Wilton School of Cake Decorating. So that was kind of a local legend, local thing. And just the way this quote unquote collection came about actually started with one piece. And it's this piece right here. It is not a Wilton piece. This came into my possession a few years ago, before I was even a reseller. It came into my possession because a friend of mine, his daughter, was getting married to a sailor, to a Navy sailor. This is a vintage 1950 piece. So you can see the 1950s on there, but this is not a Wilton piece. This was a name that I did not know. Pfeil, Pfeil, and Holing. That name does come up. They were a vintage company, but Wilton really is the one that rules the roost. So this kind of started, and the reason I still have it is because they didn't get married. So we won't go into that. But so I purchased this to give them as just a gift, not to go in their wedding topper, which I thought was a neat, unique gift. And they didn't get married. So it was just kind of sitting in my house. Just what am I going to do with this? And slowly over time, I started finding other cake toppers, including some wedding cake toppers, some vintage wedding cake toppers.
That is amazing.
So it became kind of interesting as I looked at, because I do like vintage, I do like antiques, trying to figure out the history of some of these. And when you get into the cake toppers, you get to look at the way they're dressed. So this one, because of the sweetheart neckline and the shawl shoulders, people thought this one was probably a 50s, possibly, with that big wide skirt. This one does not have any name on it. This one, though, people thought might have been a little bit earlier, because the neckline's a little bit different, but it still has the full skirt. This one is actually a different company. So Wilton is not the only one that's out there. Sometimes things are marked, sometimes they're not. This was the Van Gutman company. So you had a couple of wedding cake toppers to go along with the wedding cake. And then I thought, well, hey, Wilton's local. Maybe I could get them to do a deep dive. Well, in 2018, Wilton was actually purchased by a German company. And I couldn't get anyone to work with me to try and do something as a deep dive. So I kind of had these, wasn't sure what to do with them because it wasn't much of a collection. And then I hit pay dirt and I came across an estate sale. I had dozens of examples of items that started drifting into, the baby items and then through different decades. And so suddenly I realized I kind of have a cool collection that I didn't want to collect. So I've got a collection. I'm definitely going to sell it. This is not a collection I want to build, but it was fun doing the research because the Wilton name was such a name that I was familiar with. I wanted to do a little bit of research. They kind of pop up a lot. I actually wrote down some numbers because if anyone who's seen my deep dives, when Katie is on my channel, she is just a font of knowledge. So I feel completely challenged to not only look as good as Katie, but also sound as intelligent as Katie.
Oh, thanks.
So I did do a couple, some bits of research, and one of them was kind of tied to the wedding toppers, but it kind of went into the generic of like just cake decorating. And I think we've talked on my channel before, and I think Katie, you commented, if you go back into history, there's pudding molds, there's all kinds of different types of molds that would make types of cakes. But where did this kind of come from? And the general census is it goes back to the 17th century. It's attributed to the French because the French were the first to introduce dessert as its own course in a meal. So God bless the French. And so they introduced the concept of having a quote unquote dessert. And so from that point, they started saying, okay, well, how are we going to make a specific plated item that's going to come out as a dessert? So they started decorating them. Most of it was just piping. They didn't get into the dimensional stuff. It was dimensional piping. So like cords and ribbons and things decorating like the puddings would have been decorated. Cake toppers actually came about prior to the Civil War, and they were really for the wealthy. It was something that you had to custom. A baker would make it, and it could be dimensional. It could even be in the shape of a bride or groom, but it was totally unique. Became a little bit more common at the end of the 19th century, and it was in the 1920s that commercially made cake toppers became available, both for weddings and for others. And the first cake toppers showed up in the Sears catalog in 1927. So there were commercial ones made. Now, I don't have anything that early, but that was when they first started introducing them. So the earliest I go is going into the 50s. So I do have a couple things on that. But
now I imagine those early ones probably are hard to find because they didn't survive.
Exactly. And a lot of times they were made from different types of materials. So in some cases, they could have been made from sugar. But when they got into figural, plaster of Paris was used. So then it's like chalkware, it just really wouldn't survive over time. But glass, porcelain, so in some cases you end up in a situation where an item could have been used as a cake topper, but now as it stands alone, it just looks like a figurine. And that's really, it's one of those areas I've yet to master, because I've got an item here that was in. And a lot of the stuff I bought from the estate sale were still sealed. So I've kept a lot of these things sealed. This one was in the set, creepy baby in a bassinet. But I don't know if this is a cake topper because it has the big hole in the bottom. So if you shove this on a cake, it would get kind of gumped up. And then there's a huge sticker on the bottom that says made in Korea that clearly would not be food safe. So this one doesn't happen to have a hang tag or anything, but it's also not marked Wilton. It's not marked any company, just as made in Korea. A lot of Wilton stuff, they were actually, Wilton was the fifth United States company to set up manufacturing in Korea in the 60s. So they were manufacturing in Korea very early, but not with these little foil labels on them. So sometimes you don't know if it's going to be a cake topper or not. I mean, I graduated from high school. I had a Precious Moments graduate shoved right in the top of it. Don't recommend that. The grease just goes right into that paint. But, you can use anything as a cake topper. So sometimes they might exist. You just don't know that's what they were used for, or over age. Yes. Even these, if this is from the 30s to the 50s, it's not in the greatest condition. The flowers start falling apart. The lace starts tearing and falling apart. And it's hard to keep these things in good condition.
I can imagine. So especially with all the cake and things that you deal with, cleaning those would be really hard. Now, do you think that one that you just showed somebody handmade, or is that mass produced?
This one, there is a stamp on the bottom. It's not made with a manufacturer, but there is a number. So this one I do believe is mass produced. Now it's possible these little stands could be used for multiple things. So it's possible this was turned into a cake topper by someone who bought the individual bride and groom, bought the little florals to set it up. So it may not have been sold as a pre-created cake topper, but at least the pieces of it. This one doesn't have the detail that someone would have been making it all by hand.
That is just amazing. Now, the majority of the cake toppers you have, do they range all the way from wedding to like Christmas, or are they all sort of in the same similar genre?
The one thing that I don't have anything of is Christmas, now that you mention it. But I do have, there's a lot of special occasion items. So like, and think people of certain age will think back to these. How many people had the little graduate on their cake, or the female graduate on their cake, along with the little fake diploma that would end up on the cake. So all of these little things were ending up being produced primarily by Wilton. That was one of the biggest names, but they're just plastic. Some of them will say on the bottom, a lot of common one is made in Hong Kong, because Wilton was established in Hong Kong from 1974 until 1995. So if made in Hong Kong can cover that 20-year period that they were there. And then even once they stopped offices there, they were still manufacturing overseas. It wasn't until around 2000 that they started, maybe the 90s, they started doing made in China. So you've got some of the earlier ones would still be marked. So we do have special occasions. So I have a bunch of the special occasion ones. The earliest one I have, other than the questionable, the wedding toppers, this one I just thought was cool. I kind of showed him a little bit. This is obviously a stork. He has a little baby that hangs from his beak.
Oh, how fun.
I think he has to be attached by frosting or something, because he does have a hook. It just doesn't want to hook very well. So I don't know if a piece is broken off. This one actually says, and I could not find the company, it does have a little manufacturing thing on there that says North Hollywood, California. I could not find a company specifically that made these in North Hollywood, but this one, I actually did not pick this up as part of the lot. The reason I picked this, I picked up kind of totally independently, because I love things with stories. And this one, it's okay. First of all, everything is sticky from the cake. So that's, we'll try and pass over that kind of level of disgust. But,
I don't know how you would clean these safely.
No, exactly. I don't, that's why everything's still sticky. But what was in, all of this was in a little Ziploc baggie. And with this note, this is my corsage for my baby shower in June of 1958.
Oh,
and
my
it
God.
included the baby shower corsage.
That is incredible.
So it's got a little baby formula and a little baby bottle, the birth certificate, a little rattle, all these things, attached to this. Now, I don't think these could have been designed for a cake, possibly, but this was then tucked into it. So this is what's sticky. So this is what the cake topper was, along with the stork. And then it's kind of, I'm going to keep this all together along with the little note, because I just love the idea that somebody had a baby in 1958. And this is all the remnants from that. They kept it because you keep that kind of stuff. And that's why I think wedding toppers aren't particularly rare, because as long as you're not divorced, you want to keep the wedding topper. Mine's long gone, but not everyone gets rid of their stuff.
I think that is such a sweet little set, and I do love things with history. Now, most of these that are marked Wilton, what kind of values are you seeing online? Are some of them more collectible than others?
Definitely, some of them are more collectible than others. I'm trying to figure out, because a lot of what I have some original tags to them. So there's things. This is a company called Kitchen Capers, Fun in the Kitchen. You can see it has a zip code. So this was after 1963. But like this particular example, I can't find this one. This is the Apollo astronaut capsule. And inside, I tried to figure out what I could do without breaking open the bag. If you can see that, there's a little silver, that's the astronaut helmet. This actually has the little astronauts that came with it. So,
oh my goodness, that is amazing.
I can't find this one at all. I know it's from around 1966 because there's a G.I. Joe version of this that is from 1966 that looks exactly like it, except this part's not red. So timing wise, I know that this is also from the 60s, definitely, just like we're talking about the history. In some cases, there are pieces that'll go for definitely like $5. There's going to be things that are not particularly expensive. These are examples, I think, also from the 50s. These the little teenagers talking on the telephone. These are not stamped Wilton. These are not stamped with a date. Or no, this one does. I'm sorry, it is stamped Wilton. It's just not stamped with a date. But just by looking at the era, things of this size outside of its bag, you're probably looking at no more than $10 for an individual piece, and it's going to go up if it's an area that is of particular interest. Like suddenly this becomes a cross collectible. If you're into astronauts, if you're into the 60s, the American space program, if you're into anything with cake decorating, all of this, it crosses the reference. And if this were by itself, The problem is this may exist out in the market, but because it's not in its original hang tag, no one knows this was a cake. This was a cake piece. That this was actually designed to be a cake topper. They may have thought it was a toy. So some of the things like this, I'm not sure how I'll deal with the valuing it because I don't even know what the market should be for something like that.
Now, that piece that you just showed from the 60s with the little astronaut, I'm not up on my astronaut history. So does that correlate, you think, to something big in the astronaut or space history in the U.S., or you think that was just made to be a unique topper?
The one thing that I haven't figured out is, so the Apollo program ran basically through the 60s. So a lot of people know the Tom Hanks movie. That was Apollo 13. So that was the one that, or no, was that Apollo 11? One, like there's the Tom Hanks movie that showed that was the one that almost didn't come back. There was another program where the Apollo astronauts did die. But there were at least 13 trips or campaigns with Apollo. And this is what they came back to Earth in. So, for people of a certain age that don't realize this, and this predates me too, but the idea would be this would be part of the capsule that went into space. They would jettison the rest of it and they would get into this pod and it would literally just fall through the Earth's atmosphere and drop into the ocean. And they had to go, a boat had to go pick it up because this little thing would be bobbing along the ocean. So it's definitely of a very specific era of space travel. But I don't know what the significance of the red top is because I couldn't find any that had the red. And I don't know if like the label or the flag, I don't know if this helps indicate anything else. One of the things I was going to ask the viewers and ask you, there's stuff in here. They're wrapped. Is it worth ripping open the package to be able to open that up? Because I'll probably put this on an eBay auction. Should I go ahead and take it out of the new old stock territory and just photograph it? They're just staples. I could try and repair it. But what do you guys think I should do? Is it more important to keep it as new old stock originally sealed? Or is it better to figure out what is in there so that I can list it more properly since I can't find any other examples? So,
that is a hard question because I'm a bit of a vintage purist and I like things, original and in the packaging or, with all of the original paint and details. I'm not one to take something and like repaint it or try to fix it up. But that's the kind of thing that's unique because then you run into the stuff that's inside and people do want to know what's inside of it. I don't know, maybe leave it up to the buyer. I see people are saying, Barbie's saying, I sold my new old stock left in package and they sold originally sealed and just took lots of photos. Some people are saying no. And then Diana's saying, I would carefully open the staples and see if I could get in. Yes, you could get a staple remover and try it that way.
Yeah, because one of the things that I did is because the plastic is also old, it's hard to get through there. But I started realizing when that door opened, so like through the bag, I'm like, I'm going to open the door. So I opened the door, and then I realized that there's like little, body bags. There's little things wrapped, and I'm like, well, I don't know what's in there because I did take the top came off easily enough. If you look, you can't see those white body bags.
No.
So it's like the body bags are just in the capsule part. So maybe this is the part that came back to Earth. I don't know. So I'm like, well, what's in there? And so I kind of like started playing with the paper, and that's how I discovered the helmet. So I think there were 3 astronauts in the Apollo program. I think all 3 astronauts are in here. And so that's like, if I could find an original, my issue is if I could find this original, I'd have no reason to open it. I could be like, here's what the original looks like. Here's what's included. Here's everything you need to know about it. This one is sealed, give me a lot of money. But because I can't find the original, people won't know what it is. So like the people saying, let the buyer decide, I totally am good with that, but how do I sell it first? Because they may not buy it if they don't know exactly what is in there.
And you're right. Like you mentioned, a lot of people probably would find these without the package and say, okay, these are not anything but children's toys. And so they're probably listing them in a whole nother category of eBay.
Yep.
Trying to hunt that down sometimes can be really, really hard. So that is interesting. So I hope you share on Instagram what you do with that.
Yeah, we'll definitely figure that out. And so that kind of gave me the 50s and the 60s. So then when I got through the bigger lot, when I moved away from the wedding toppers, I actually started basically, so this will be for people of a certain age, you'll start recognizing in the 70s is when Wilton started doing all of the people. So you've got the fireman, you've got the golfer with his little, and his golf club actually comes away. You've got the fisherman, you've got the children, the little cowboy. All of these. So this one is still in the Wilton cake top, in a Wilton hang bag. What I discovered, because I have a lot of them that are in this Kitchen Capers. Kitchen Capers was a retail store. So this one doesn't say who made it, but a lot of them, actually the fireman is also a kitchen caper. It says Wilton right on the bottom. So and he's dated, I think he was dated 1970. So it's easy to track some of them, but it threw me because I thought Kitchen Capers was its own brand. Well, they were just reselling stuff. So still nice, because if he were all by himself, you'd think he was just part of maybe there's a fire truck somewhere that's missing a fireman.
Exactly.
But he is actually a cake topper. And then as you got, this is 1979. And this one does have, because the 70s is when barcodes were introduced. So this one does have the barcode, or it does have a barcode. It is printed in Hong Kong, but it has the original copyright date on it. But you can see the plastic gets a little shadowy, over time. So those are the 70s. That's the stuff that I grew up on. That's what every birthday cake would have had something put on it. And then you moved into the 80s and then into the licensing. So I've got Batman.
Oh, how fun is that?
So again, if you just saw him by himself, you just think he was a toy, but this one is marked. It is Wilton. That's where they started getting into the licensing. So these are DC Comics, 1982, and then Wilton Enterprises in Woodridge, Illinois. So, they started doing that. I've got R2D2 and C3PO still in its tag.
That's really cool.
Those both are marked Wilton, and I think they are both marked, can't remember what year these, I think 80. Looks like 1980 is what these were marked. So, you as you go through the years, you get more and more detail. I found the collection I got kind of stopped at the 80s. What I found in the 90s are candles. So they do start doing other things. But Wilton, again, kind of became the big name. One thing I wanted to show, because they did more than just toppers. They did structural things, or I'm still not 100% sure what these are. But these are sold as a set. The tag is still in here. That there's a dozen of these. They all say Mother's Day, but if you can see how long
they are, really long.
So what I'm thinking is these might have been a cake stabilizer. So you could have put like a 2 or 3 tiered cake together, and then you would just spike this all the way down. So
that would make sense.
Tiers, because I don't know what else you would do with something this long.
Why you would have so many of them.
Yeah. So the only other thing I could think of is that they're not technically cake decorators. Maybe they're floral. Like you would put this in a bouquet of flowers. So, sometimes things have cross purposes, but so you do.
And those might have been something you could have gotten wholesale for a store, because there's so many of them. Do you think?
That's true. Yeah. And the tag that's in there is somewhat like business-like. It gives its product number, 1 dozen. It lists the colors that are included. So yes, I would think you're right. This would be something you might get in bulk, and then you would just have those 4 colors.
And I noticed on the other cake toppers you were showing, there's a difference in pricing. So if you look at the one that you have for the kitchen corner versus the other one, I noticed there's a big difference in price. One was like $1 something, and the other one was $2. So
some of these, and again, this could be different parts. So this one was 1979. So we're in the late 70s. Inflation has kicked in. Gas is not available. This one was dated, I think, 1970. So there's a significant price difference, even though the sizes are about the same. So that's the, downside, or, something I didn't even pay attention to that, but you're right. That's something you can really pay attention to, is what era it was. If you can't find a date, figure out what they sell for. That's something I do ever since Martha did Vintage Conversation, did her show and tell with you on the vintage patterns. If I find someplace with patterns, I start flipping through them, and I'm not great about recognizing the era unless it's super obvious, but you can recognize the price on the package. So
that does help.
Yeah, if the pattern costs $4, well, that's not very old. But if that pattern costs 20 cents, that puppy's old, and I'm picking it up because that's where the old stuff came in. And so, yeah, price definitely is a way to figure out, in some cases, age.
That's a great tip. And lots of people in the chat are remembering decorating cakes with their mother or their grandmother, or all kinds of fun things. My mom would let us decorate cakes, but she would just kind of let us go wild. And she had all those little silver colored edible decorations that you could just pour all over the cake.
So one of the things I wanted to show, I've kind of skipped over this part, but the love of decorating cakes has been a very real thing in my family, and then also growing up. This is my daughter's 13th birthday cake. And instead of doing like Scary 13 or anything like that, she did basically what made things unlucky. So there's a broken mirror at the bottom. There's a ladder that you can walk under. So we just pick things. We have these done by a professional cake designer that went on to, she did HGTV shows and things like that. So it's one of those cases that I just wanted to show some of the cakes that we've had. This was my personal favorite. We recreated a clue board.
Oh, that's so cool, Patrick.
And so this was one of her favorite ones to do because all of the floor, all of this was fondant. So she made every floor in a unique type of fondant to make a different floor. So, and this goes back into some of the history, is cake decorating used to, for a long time really was just fondant and then decorated on top of. And then you get things that became dimensional. So we had a movie theme. We always had themed birthdays for my daughter as she was growing up. So we had the movie theme. So that is fondant popcorn, not real popcorn. It's fondant popcorn. And then the movie reel. And
that is amazing.
See if I can get this was the first one we ever hired her to do. So on the right hand side is our favorite place. When Amelia was growing up, we used to live in Washington DC for a few years when she was little, and her favorite place was Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg. And we went there. We lived there for 2 years, and we went to Colonial Williamsburg 9 times. And so when we had our first birthday party, when she came back to Chicago, she was, let's see, what birthday would that have been? She was turning 6. The designer made the cake.
Wow.
So that is a 3-dimensional version of the governor's palace at Colonial Williamsburg made via cake.
That is incredibly detailed.
Yeah, so she had a blast doing that. And then we had a business. So when we did anniversaries at the store, my wife and I at the time, we owned a sewing quilting store. So we did a sewing basket with, the little vintage pin cushion with the tomato, the little old, measuring tape. And then we did our store was Mission quilts. So we did a Mission style, Frank Lloyd Wright style. We did a bed. That was our first anniversary. So she made the bed in the background and designed the quilt to go over the bed. So we've always enjoyed cake decorating, but again, never thought I'd have a collection. And trust me, I'm not going to have one for long. But so the cake stuff is real.
That is amazing, Patrick. She's got some talent for sure.
Yes.
Well, I am so interested to see what other cake toppers you found, because I never thought of these, like I said, as being a collection. And I think that if someone wanted to start a fun little kitchen display, this would be it.
Well, one of the areas is kind of like a subcategory, and I have a few examples of it. If anyone follows Cindy from Mimi's Treasure Cottage, she's talked about this before. She does, and I think somebody actually might have said in the chat, she specializes, or not specializes, but she collects the cupcake toppers. So I do have some examples. Avert your eyes for those fearing the clowns.
Oh, clowns.
But so here we just have a bag of clown heads. But you can see they've got the little spike on them because in this case, sometimes the spike would be used to hold a candle. So you will come across these little spikes. So if it's got a hole in it, then it would be designed to go into regular cake, and it would be to hold however many candles that you have. But when they're designed this way with a spike and then with the design attached to them, they would have been designed obviously for a smaller platform. They would have gone on the cupcakes. So collecting cupcake toppers is kind of like a little specialty sub area, because yes, when you find them new old stock, they're going to go for a little bit more because you're getting a bunch of them. But think about it. A lot of times you could find just one of these. So if you're creating one of those junk jars, think of what a junk jar would look like if you were just collecting all of these individual.
Oh, that would be so fun.
So like this one is the freaky clown heads. This one, again, probably a lot of people are familiar with it. I showed the graduate, but these have the little picks on them. So these would have just been the little graduate cupcake toppers. So you'd have an individual, and things like this are still available in most grocery stores. You can get like a little ring or a little something. So it's just collecting and finding the vintage ones. And these are going to fall a lot of times, it's either going to be a birthday theme or a special occasion. So graduation. This one is all little diaper pins. So you could scatter them over a large cake, but most likely these were designed to be like one little one, because again, for people of a younger generation, their cupcakes didn't always have 18 inches of frosting on the top. So you used to just have a little cupcake and a tiny little bit of frosting, and this would just stick up.
Yeah.
We just got cupcakes from a bakery for an event over the weekend, and the frosting on top, it was taller than the cupcake. I'm like, how am I supposed to eat this? Not that I didn't mind trying, but once upon a time, you needed actually something to decorate the cupcake because you only had a tiny bit of icing on the top. So, again, something like this, throw one or two of those in a little junk jar, and you've got just this cool little set.
And I think too that these would be great in a wreath if you were making.
Oh, absolutely.
A vintage wreath, that would be really fun. I mean, so the possibilities with these guys are endless as far as a collection goes.
Absolutely. Now, some of them, with the smaller ones, if you did a smaller scale wreath, but if you did a large wreath, I show, like, these are some that I didn't find dates to. I'll just kind of do a couple of show and tell. A little tennis player. You could just do like an entire sports themed wreath. You could do, you could just find all these random little characters, and you could have a decent sized wreath and put some fairly large sized characters on it. They won't get lost. There's some good size to some of them. This one is one of those cases. I actually found another bag of these without the hang tag. I just found a bag. I'm like, I don't think they're toppers because they have these little holes. So I'm thinking they're more for keychains or something. But I think in some cases what this was designed to be is that's what they were. You put them on the cupcake, but then you could if you wanted to, you could take it home and you had a little party favor that you could put on your keychain or whatever. So these are little roller skates.
We had rings when I was growing up. We had little spider rings that people would stick in cupcakes for Halloween. And then you could take the ring off and wear it. Of course, it was always gooey with sugar in the cake. So I really know why.
You just had to lick it a few more times. And because again, if you found these by themselves, you would just think, again, it's part of a keychain, part of a toy, whatever. But this hang tag, the only thing this company did was party supplies and cake decorating. So it could be a party favor, but I like the idea that these could have also been the cupcake toppers as well. Related, this one, I think by age, I don't think she's a cupcake topper, but this ends up, if you don't want to collect the actual wedding cake toppers, I think this is drifting into a different area. I'm not sure if she's a bride or if she's a bridesmaid. So she may be a bride. You can find, and this is one of the things, particularly as you're getting into collecting vintage for a contemporary audience, if you can find the brides and grooms separately, you would be able to. Thank you, Paula. If you find the brides and grooms separately, you could then create a modern wedding cake that maybe has two females on it or has two males on it. You're not restricted to, like this style. They're literally attached to the hip. They're one piece. So, that was because at that time that was what a traditional wedding would have had. This gives you a little bit more flexibility, but she's definitely, I don't know, what do you think that neckline, maybe 60s?
Yeah, I think 60s, especially with that hairstyle.
Yeah. So there are different levels available.
And we have a good question coming in from Lavish Mango Melinda. She says, "Hi, Patrick. Are you familiar with the 19th century ceramic German cake toppers?"
I am not. I did quite a bit of the research prepping for this show and tell, and I found the concept that yes, they existed at that time, and that some of the cake toppers would have gone into even the 18th century, but nothing about a market specifically for wedding toppers. They was always what I found, because if it's on the internet, it must be true. But what I found is that at that era, they tended to be custom made, or so if it was a figurine of a man and a woman, I would assume that would have been made in bulk. But I wasn't finding a lot of examples. So no, I'm not familiar with the German specific ceramic ones, brides and grooms. I'd love to see them though, because I'm sure that that's my thing. Plastic is a lovely item. World can't run without it. But if I was going to start a collection, I'd be starting a porcelain collection, and that's exactly what I want to find. So, but no, I've not seen those.
Now, do you know if some of the earlier ones were made out of celluloid or Bakelite, or were they all just a more modern plastic?
I'm sure they were, because they did start mass producing them in the 20s. So at that time, celluloid was plastic. They didn't know any better. They didn't know it was going to burst into flames, if you put it in front of the wrong thing. That was what they had available. And so those would be very hard to find, just because they'd be so fragile. But plastic definitely was what they were introduced with, because once they started getting into the mass marketing, like if you're going to be in the Sears catalog, you're going to be in the Sears catalog for something that the general public would be able to afford, not something only the Vanderbilts and the Astors would be able to afford. So they definitely had to find cheaper materials, but that means they wouldn't have lasted as long.
Now, during the 30s, when you get into the Great Depression, do you find that people didn't feel that they were necessary and they couldn't afford them? So a lot of them sort of went by the wayside then?
It's one of the things that I found interesting when I was doing the research, specifically on Wilton. So I can't really talk about the industry as a whole, but Wilton didn't even start until 1929. So it started the year of the Depression. Now I'm going to assume they started maybe like in the spring, and then 6 months later, the bottom fell out. But they kept going. So they were doing it in their home. And I think what they were focusing on at that time is, okay, if you're going to make royal icing, you basically need confectioner's sugar, you need egg whites. You only need one or two ingredients that, as long as we weren't in wartime, they weren't that expensive. So they could teach you how to make a really elaborate cake top, but it may not have been in the form of a bride and groom. So I think that they did exist. I'm sure they were still being sold, but I think those became, just like they were in the 19th century, they were status symbols. You didn't see them very often. And if you had one, it's like, oh, wow, you have money, because you're basically buying something that literally will be used once and then never seen again. So I think what Wilton was teaching at the time, and why some of the stuff that they produced really didn't start coming about until the 50s, they were saying, okay, use your tips, use your piping bag. Here's how you can make an elaborate wedding cake, fit for a queen, but it's simply dimensional frosting, so that your topper could actually just be a series of roses that looks beautiful, but it's not necessarily a topper that we would lift off and keep.
That makes a lot of sense. These are just so cool.
And really, once I found this big lot, like most of all the bag stuff is all found in one place. That was when I'm like, this is actually kind of cool. And so I did reach out to Wilton one more time just to see, hey, I'd like to do this. And 90% of the examples I have are theirs, but with no response. It's one of those cases. I can't sit on this collection forever, and it's not that valuable. I do think there is some value, but I don't think it's that valuable piece by piece. But I don't want to sit on it. Some of the things were a mystery, when I bought the big lot, because I kind of took the assumption that if it was in the box, then it was supposed to be a cake topper.
That's interesting.
So on the back are two wires that could be used to like secure it into the cake, but it easily could have been used to hang on a wall. So it is a movable clock. Other than like a New Year's cake, which I don't know if that's a thing.
New Year's Eve.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's a thing, or would this be maybe a baby cake? So you could say the baby was born at like a specific time, but I don't know if people did that. Like I don't even know the era on this. It's got kind of a metallic and the silver, but the blue is just a thick paper cardboard. I really couldn't tell you. I mean, it's got the look of something from the 30s or 40s, but it could be 60s, just to make it look old. So I don't know if people remember something like this on their cake. There's just random
it could
things.
be for Alice in Wonderland, Karen. I'm late.
There you go. I'm late.
Very important
I'm
date.
late. A lot of the anniversary type things. This was another company that I come across. So this is, again, it's a hang tag from Kitchen Capers. So these are fairly common. You see even in porcelain, it was just a gift idea. People would have parties, 50th anniversary, 50th, anniversary of the company, whatever, 50th wedding anniversary. This one is a company called Katat. And you can see there's a seal up here at the top. And it was hard to read, but I found some other examples, Katat. And that was a name I don't come across very often. I couldn't find any research on when they operated, but they have Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs is one of the figures they made. So they seem to do cake stuff. And I do believe this is a cake topper, not only because of the sign, but there's the little stand in it. So you'd put that in the cake, and then this would actually sit upright, not flat on the cake. It would actually be propped. So there's that. And then I'm not sure if this goes with it, because at the top of this one, there's a little hole.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
And I don't know why that would be there, other than to maybe put something like this on top, which I don't know why you need to say 50 twice.
That's
so
what
maybe
I was going to say. Are they
there was an interchangeable topper, maybe. Like these I'm not as familiar with. I definitely see them. You see that, like I said, you see them in porcelain with a Lefton. You always see them. They're the ones left over at a Goodwill. No one wants to buy the 25th or the 50th anniversary pieces. But it was definitely a thing, because if you were going to decorate and celebrate somebody's 50th wedding anniversary, you typically didn't go to a bakery to get a custom cake. You just made one at home, and you put a little 89-cent topper on the top.
Now, would you put a candle in that top piece there?
Maybe. It's really, really small, but now that you say that, that would be about the size of one of those little tiny birthday candles.
That might be what that
might be. So then they'd have something I guess to blow out instead of setting the house on fire with 50 candles. You could just have the one. That makes a lot of sense. Because I didn't like the idea of the 50 on the 50.
No, that just
in the bag, that was all I had. I'm like, well, I'm not sure what else it would be. This one, again, I'm not 100% sure these are cake toppers. They're marked as emblems in a company I'm not familiar with, but it was in with the set, so it kind of all went together.
Now, Dalbert was making us laugh. He says that clock should be an out-of-office cake. I'll be back at noon. I'm going to have some cake and wait. I like that story, Dalbert. I think that's fun.
The other category of cake decorating that I had found, and again, this is all from this big lot, but you start seeing things and you have flashbacks and you remember, it's the idea of signs on the cake. So you would have most people would write directly on the cake, but then you'd have these little plaques that you could put somebody's name on. You could say, good luck, best wishes, whatever. You could write in frosting. And then that would be, you'd be able to wipe it off and then reuse it for another event. So this one is like more of a formal, like an easel. And this one's more like a little, fishing hole type sign, but you could put the boy's name or girl's name on it to kind of customize it without it just being on the cake. So that was a thing. I had a few of those that I thought were something different.
Now, and what era were those?
Those I couldn't find any dates on. I'm thinking this one is 80s, just because it's a little bit more elaborate. It's a little bit more gaudy. And that's just, that's the 80s. The picket, the little wood signs, those could be, I would say 70s or 80s. This one is actually from a different company. This was from Consumer's Bakery, but again, they're just reselling it. And because I like your idea of what you said to search, it's before the zip code was required. So your pre, like, I think 90s is when the zip 90s or I think 90s is when the zip code became required. But it's also only 89 cents. So price wise, this is for a little bit older, just because it's only, you would pay a bunch more for that right now.
Yes, that would probably be like $8 now.
Exactly.
In this world.
The other area, and it's again, when you get into what were cakes made for, what were people, what do they need? So you've got the baby, to a certain extent, you've got the wedding, you definitely have birthday. We've got to get religious. So I will show these to you because my fingers have not burst into flame yet. So we're all is good. But these are the things I remember growing up for first communion, confirmation. You're trying to make a cake. It's all white, and then you shove a Bible on it, or you shove a crucifix into it. So these I would say also are more from the 70s or the 80s because that's what you put on a cake back then. This one, let's see. This was 69 cents, but it's a little bit simpler. This one does not have a price, but again, tracing things, it's definitely past 63 because it's got a 5-digit zip code. So again, I'd say probably 80s. But another, I try to group some of the categories of what I had.
And it's wild that there's so many varieties of categories. I mean, you think about how many different things people celebrate, and it makes me wonder if there's actually vintage St. Patrick's Day toppers or Halloween toppers.
Oh, I'm sure there are. And I'm sure that where I got this, if they had those, I'm sure they were separated and sold separately. So what I got was kind of like the leftovers. But they were fun leftovers to have because it's kind of fun to explore and also kind of think about things. So like this one is all these little old tools.
Oh, I love that.
And this one, again, this probably maybe a little bit older. You've got just the brown and the silver tools. I think they're too big to be cupcake toppers. So I think these ended up being a situation where it's like, okay, you're going to decorate and you're just going to scatter these across. Like, I don't know, do you put these, that's how you cut the individual piece of the cake. But just all these tiny little pieces, a little bit too big, I think, to be, I don't know, I guess you could prop it upright and it could go into a cupcake. But that was just another little category, is just the mixed idea as opposed to one big item having the multiples.
So I had a Mickey Mouse cake when I was a kid. I had a golf cake at one time. And I think I had, I want to say, some sort of a tool cake. And yes, they did scatter the little flat pieces around the cake top. And I remember the Wilton, I think, actually made the little pieces. When I had the golf cake, it was a half golf ball, like a semicircle, and it was in the middle of the cake. My grandfather was into golfing, and so he got me golfing a little bit. I'm not so good at it now, but I did a lot more when I was younger, and that was a fun cake.
Well, I think one of the things that changed for a lot of people, and why this is such a very specific thing to my childhood, is that Wilton, again, they started in 1929, long before me, but in the 70s, they released pretty much what became the first book for cake decorating to try and teach people. They had the Wilton Cake Decorating School, but they recognized they wanted to go broader than that. So they started teaching, and that was before you had a Martha Stewart or somebody that was, customizing something like that. You'd have the Galloping Gourmet, you'd have Julia Child, and they might make like super specialty things and maybe every once in a while make a cake. But they created a book specifically on saying, hey, if you need to make a birthday cake, here are some ideas. If you need to make your own wedding cake, here are some ideas. And so it really put it in the hands of the housewife or the family or whatever. And then you had all of these little pieces that you could pick up at the local grocery store or the Kmart or whatever you shopped at that were inexpensive, that you could suddenly make something. And that book, they said, ended up going on to print 600,000 copies. So like in the big scheme of things, not the most popular book, but for such a niche book, it really introduced the world. And that's, like I said, my mom taught classes on how to do cake decorating. It was something that people wanted to know. Maybe you only did it for one cake, maybe you did it all the time, but Wilton really was the name to put that in the hands of the everyday person.
Which is just amazing. You had some great information and great history and wonderful things to share. And this comment by I for Eclectic is one of the reasons I've been doing show and tells, because I want people to see that there are so many different things to collect, and that inspires other people to go out and do their own research and start finding something and maybe get into a new collection. So that's exactly the point of the show and tells. And I think that this is so cool. So when will these be available, Patrick, for your sale?
I will probably have at least one or two of them in my sale tomorrow night, just because I wanted to start selling them. So I thought it'd be a good time. I'm going to probably select some of the more interesting ones, like the astronaut capsule. Those will probably go onto my eBay store as an auction. So I might post that as my auction item for tomorrow night. So they will be going over time. I will say though, for anybody that saw anything, and this goes for my haul videos, this goes for a lot of us as resellers. If you see something you like, just send me an email. Just reach out to me, comment on the video, whatever the case. Let me know you're interested. We can probably work something out. I want to sell it, so it doesn't matter to me when I sell it. So you kind of get the advanced, you get the benefit of watching the video, whether you're doing it live or you're watching it on the replay. If you've seen the video and you see something, hey, send me an email. I'm not proud. I'll sell it to you. But once I announce it to go into a live sale, I won't sell it after that. But for now, all of the stuff we sell, and nothing's going to be particularly, I don't think anything's particularly valuable. The wedding cake or cup toppers, I want to do a little bit more research on. My personal favorite still is this one.
I think that is really neat.
Because of the sailor relationship. I mean, I just think that puts it into a different category. And it's dated 1950. So it's like you're past World War II, but you haven't gotten into the Korean War yet. Like it's kind of a cool snapshot in time.
It really is. And I love that you found that piece with the note. I think that adds a whole
that'll probably, that I might hold on to for a little while, but that I will eventually sell as well. Because again, it's just, I wish there was a name or something on here that I would actually be able to try and trace something. They wrote it on the back of a card that I'm not 100% sure what this was, like time, estimated cost. Like they just used some random note card. But yeah, that's an interesting, unique piece as well. I did want to show, and I should have paid more attention to this. I think I showed a couple of these. Let's see if we can do it up close. So most of the case, if you're going to be doing the research on, picking these up for the person that said they're going to start looking through the cake toppers, the Wilton ones typically are pretty well marked. So this one you can see is 1978. And then this one still says Hong Kong on it. But there was going to be a lot of them that did not have dates on them. And they will just say, in some cases, they just say made in Hong Kong, which, it's iffy. There's a lot of stuff made in Hong Kong, but if you start piecing together some of the puzzle pieces, you can say, like, okay, it looks like a cake topper. It's made in Hong Kong. It is probably Wilton. This is the Graduate's one of them. So it's the same type of font. It's the same type of embossing. Really not showing up very well, but once you start seeing it on the Wilton pieces, you will see it more often. There are other names that'll pop up. This wedding cake topper was Van Gutman. And again, it's embossed right in there, upside down. So a lot of times it's fairly easy to identify. Where it becomes iffy is when you find this stuff that's not marked and you start wondering, well, wait a minute, is this a toy or is this a cake topper? And so a lot of the things that you want to have is typically the bottoms will be very flat, because it's going to go into the icing. And so you won't want big holes that'll fill, because then you can't clean it. So that's why the biggest tip, and it's not 100% tip because there's definitely going to be exceptions, but the biggest tip would be if it's got a lot of detail in the bottom or a lot of tiny little holes or, little places where the porcelain, if it was porcelain where it would be made, you could still use it as a topper, but it probably wasn't designed to be a topper, because that would be very difficult to reuse. So
that makes a lot of sense. Now, when Wilton got into the 90s and they started marking their things China, were they still marked Wilton? Do you know?
Yes. So the best example for those, I don't have any in the cake toppers, but the best example of those is because I like cakes. I did when I had a booth, vintage booth locally. One of the things that I stocked in my booth were the character pans, like the shaped pans. So Big Bird and Cookie Monster and that. So those are, again, they're very, very clearly marked. And you'll also see a very clear, definite delineation is when you get into the later ones. So like Bob the Builder, Dora the Explorer, they're still made in very high detail, high quality, and they're still a really high grade aluminum. Wilton is just a good quality manufacturer, but they say very clear as day, made in China. So those are really not going to have as much of collectability, just because they feel that anyone would feel those are newer. It's made in China, it's probably lower quality. It's not true. I mean, they're still high quality, but they're just not going to have they're not going to get the value. Where you're going to see it is when you can get the ones that are still marked in the 70s and the 80s and the really popular characters. I got a really old one, I think was from the 60s, but it was like an eagle. I actually take it back. It was from the 70s. I think it was supposed to be for the bicentennial. Well, who's making a cake in the shape of an eagle? So that one didn't have much value at all. But Big Bird, which was like a little bit newer, everyone wanted Big Bird because everyone remembers Big Bird, and they do look kind of cool. If you want to hang them on your wall, you have the embossed face, and they take up a big amount of space. So definitely different cross levels of collectability.
That is just so cool, Patrick. Well, thank you so much for your time and being on tonight and sharing this amazing collection. So make sure you guys follow Patrick at Trusty Huckster Mercantile. I've linked his channel down below so you can follow these in his upcoming sales and on eBay. And of course, don't forget, if there's something you saw, you can email him at tmhvintage@gmail.com. I'll link that in the description box as well. And thank you all so much for joining us. If you're coming in late, I saw a few people. No worries. The replay will be up, so you can always tune back in. This was so interesting. I learned so much about cake toppers, and I hope you guys had a lot of fun. So as always, folks, I hope you will stay in, stay safe, and binge YouTube, and catch Patrick tomorrow at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bye, friends.
Thanks a lot, Katie. Bye, everybody.